So just a quick reminder of the code of conduct we've all agreed to in being participants here at Charleston Conference, and onto our agenda. So I'll start out by sharing some findings from SAGE's research into how social impact is implemented at colleges and universities to better understand institutional strategy, how faculty incorporate it into their courses, and of course how it's included in library collections. And from there I'll hand over to our librarian panelists who will go into much more detail about their collections and the skills and resources they're using to help students progress through their studies. And you'll note as they go through their presentations that we've ordered them to help scaffold those skills and resources to illustrate how students can use social impact resources in their assignments, progress to hands-on learning, and ultimately develop more sustainable solutions after their graduation. And then, of course, we'll have time for discussion and Q&A. And during that time, if you have questions, please do take the microphones so that it's recorded for the online session. So I work in the research and strategic initiatives part of SAGE, and one of our key functions is to help the new product development process. And we have a very systematic approach to this. So we start out by trying to understand and identify a problem or an issue in the market. And then from there we can propose and then test a solution. And we'll go through as many iterations as we need to before we feel like we have a solid and grounded concept, at which point then we'll go on to build and deliver that product. And with social impact, this stemmed from our wonderful business editorial department, who was hearing from their authors, editors, and their relationships with the AACSB, the business accrediting institution for business programs, that social impact was becoming a more and more prominent topic and issue in their studies. And so we decided to explore and learn more about how it's being implemented. So we started, as we often do, with our library advisory boards. They are our trusted partners, and we have one devoted to business education and resources. And so in January of 2024, we met with them to learn more about how they were implementing social impact into their institution's strategy, what kinds of courses their faculty were teaching, and of course the resources that they as librarians were using. And that's quite a diverse group in terms of the institutions that they represent. We have the large public research universities, and then all the way to private liberal arts, more teaching-oriented schools. And the ways that they were implementing social impact were just as varied as the institutions themselves. So they ranged from those who said, I'm not quite sure what's happening in business, but we know it's happening within other disciplines. One spoke about how social impact was an inherent part of what they do as a higher education institution, but not necessarily an explicit part of the university's strategy. And then we had another candidate in that room talking about how their institution had very intentionally tied their strategy to the UN Sustainable Development Goal framework. So a real range, but consistently all working with social impact. So we're starting to see that need emerge. And we also wanted to, of course, get the faculty perspective. And so we convened a focus group of UK and US business faculty. And we learned lots of interesting things about how they're incorporating social impact into their courses. But one of the most interesting things that we learned was that it wasn't necessarily about memorizing facts or figures or theories, but rather social impact was an information literacy issue. And they needed students to learn how to critically consume the social impact information they were receiving and ultimately be working with as graduates. Like any self-respecting research methodologist, I wanted to use multiple methods to understand what librarians and faculty were truly doing in terms of social impact and what was going on at their institutions. So we asked how relevant social impact was to their institution's strategy. And 2/3 or more of faculty and librarians said even if it wasn't the top priority, it was among the top priorities. So we're starting to make a case for a very broad issue in libraries. And one that, as a library, you can advocate for the resources as something that is part of the larger institution mission. And then we, of course, asked faculty about how many of them were incorporating social impact into their courses and how many of their courses. And almost 9 in 10 are incorporating it into at least one or more of their courses. And then, of course, librarians told us that 7 in 10 of them told us that social impact was either extremely or very important to their collection. So to dig more into exactly how that's happening, I'm going to hand over to our lovely panelists. Valerie, thank you.
Hello, so I have the pleasure of the first prompt today. So just a refresher, I'm Valerie. I'm a business librarian at James Madison University. And so the first prompt that we're going to talk about today is exploring an example of an undergraduate course assignment that many librarians that you may have seen before in some format or other. These types of assignments pop up all across all disciplinary areas, but the specific example that I'll be talking about today is from my business context, but I think it can be applied across the university. So the course, just to have a little context behind this example, so the course is an interpersonal skills class that is a required core course for students in the College of Business. So every student comes through this at some point in their time at the university. And the assignment themselves that they have to explore throughout this course is a large research assignment that they have to use is a social issues team project. And this project is a research-based group presentation exploring social issues, things like climate change, criminal justice, feminism, and to encourage students to become informed citizens who seek to learn and understand diverse perspectives. Given that this is a business course, many students choose to narrow in on corporate social governance and how different industries impact and are impacted by these topics as their kind of way to narrow things down a little bit. So traditionally, library instruction in this course has kind of focused around one-shots and supporting this course with an asynchronous course guide to highlight resources that students will need because it is an impossible amount of topic and skills and resources that needs to be covered for supports with social issues topics like this, which we'll look at in a little bit. But some of the topics that I've explored with students over this course that I've been supporting with them for a while have been things like finding, evaluating sources, traditional information literacy skills, synthesizing sources from multiple sources, and trying to get them to some of those more advanced information literacy skills very quickly. And often this is a research course that this is their, as business students, first experience with university level research. So, to kind of speak more to that, some of the things that I've noticed over supporting this course for over 2 years is that some of the, one of the reasons students struggle with the social issues topics that they're dealing with is that they're very afraid of being perceived as insensitive or offensive as they explore these topics, especially given that this is a format where they're presenting to their peers at the end. They're very tentative as they approach research in this area because they're afraid of being offensive or perceived as offensive with their peers, especially because business is in our university is very male dominated. Some of these teams are full males and they're exploring topics like feminism and they approach them very tentatively. So they approach this rather than as looking at an opportunity for them to grow or explore more. So trying to spark curiosity for these topics can sometimes be a little complicated. And encouraging that and sitting more in that research area before you get into the actual building of the presentation, it's hard and tough to keep them to stay in that area to foster their sense of curiosity. Secondly, the other thing that I've noticed with this assignment is there's two portions to the research for an assignment like this. So there's both a secondary research component where students need to find and use articles and sources on the web. And then they're also, because this is a topic that impacts real people, they're encouraged to go out into the community and interview as well. So they do a little bit of primary research, which my colleagues will talk about more in depthly how that works with social issues topics in the future prompts as well. But one of the complex things that students tend to struggle with dealing with secondary and primary research is the primary research is new to them and very, I would say something they're more afraid and stressed out about because they have to find those people to interview and to talk about. They have to come up with the questions that they need to ask. And so often what we found with students is because they were more stressed about this, they would choose the primary research questions and interviews much more upfront before actually having a chance to dive into that secondary research and learn more about their topic. So then at the end of the assignment, they would scramble to try to fill in their assumptions and biases rather than the other way around is using the primary research to support the secondary research that they're finding. So trying to encourage students to flip that narrative was also a complicated part of supporting social issues. So we have a couple resources and skills outlined here that tend to be very supportive to students when they're researching in these sorts of areas. So this really builds upon traditional information literary skills. They are doing normal things like finding articles and is particularly on the web, and you're trying to encourage them to get beyond that article requirement, whereas like a traditional research assignment where students they have to find 6 peer-reviewed articles, the skills that we tend to focus on with the social issues topic is getting them beyond that and getting them closer towards what it's like to evaluate and deal more intensely with authority as constructed and contextual. So dealing with those popular news sources on the web and how they can take bits and pieces of all of these different resources and build a completely unique narrative rather than the idea when they approach this research for the first time that they're going to find a perfect source that tells them everything they need to know and that they don't necessarily need to dive as deeply into this topic as maybe some previous research assignments they've had in the past. So to do that, you have to introduce so many more resources to them than maybe traditional. You might not just be able to say, oh, well, JSTOR or this one article database will be everything you need, and you'll be able to find something here for your scholarly topic. Instead, we're introducing students to how to use advanced search functions in Google. They'll have to dive into all different news sources, subscriptions, and different aggregate databases that brings things together. They'll also be looking at public and private company information to get to that corporate social governance part of this prompt. And so then they might also think to look at things like case studies, government organizations and associations that deal with this topic. You might encourage them to look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So there's so many more places that they're pulling from for research in this area, and so it can be a lot to introduce. All right. Is there anything anyone wants to add? All right, then I will introduce the next prompt. Steve?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. All right, so now we're going to up the stakes a bit. Now we're going to talk about classes partnering with local organizations and local community groups of different types. So that's going to be a next level of discussion. These can include a wide variety of classes. It could be capstone classes, seniors and or final semester master students, among other possibilities, trying to put together all the work they've done, all the knowledge they've gained, experience, and into one final project. Or a consulting class where student teams, usually it's teams, it's rarely an individual, are charged with doing a problem-solving project for a client. And it could be a nonprofit, doesn't have to be a corporate client. We'll get more into that in a little bit. So consulting classes, and that's true of not just business students, by the way, I'll talk about that as well. Or practicums, which could be more of an individual working with it, working with these local organizations. So that's more of the nature of these classes than compared to Valerie. And it'll be different when Robin comes up, talks about the third scenario we came up with. So briefly, because it connects to my examples, UNCG I'm representing today, a social mobility campus. We are 2/3 women because originally we're the women's college for UNC system. Minorities serving, first generation serving, at least among undergraduates. And that does impact, the nature of that student body impacts the kind of projects and the kind of work they do. But before we get into examples, as we've talked about already, I'm going to emphasize that this is not just business students. So for example, UNCG, I have a list here, I have to look at it or else I'll forget something. Nonprofit management program, public policy program, economic geography, which is in our geography department, public health education, arts administration, and yes, marketing and management and entrepreneurship and some other programs. So it's social science-y overall, and Rebecca gave me a head nod, so I think that's what she learned from her research as well, plus business schools. So emphasizing, even though 3 of us are business librarians, this is not limited to that somewhat narrowly defined group of students. It's quite broad. Okay, examples. So just this semester, I have a list of 5 examples of projects that illustrate this point, and then we'll get into the skills and resources after that. So for example, a new strategic plan for the city of Greensboro to help support the home unhoused. That's one MBA team project this semester. They're doing consulting for the city on that. Somewhat related, training, a program to train unhoused to get certified to build a tiny house and then live in the tiny house. So in addition to getting a place to live, these unhoused persons are getting skills that they can then turn around into a job and hopefully, have their lives changed from that point. There's one team researching how a nonprofit used furniture bank, a used furniture store that, just provides furniture for who needs it, to turn the broken and unwanted furniture into biochar. I had to look that up, bio-char, fertilizer, kind of fertilizing process. Is it feasible for them to use furniture in this way? The 4th example, marketing plan for a nonprofit enabling and encouraging kids of color in a suburban/rural county, Alamance County, North Carolina, to have more time and enjoy more time spending in the woods. It's kind of like scouting in a way, but a little more focused on certain populations of people of color in Alamance County, kids of color, and learning just how to enjoy it and therefore have a richer life experience and also just more opportunity than kids who never thought of that before. Last example, not quite as socially oriented, but still important. There is a rural county in North Carolina called Stokes County. It is on the foothills of the Blue Ridge Parkway. If you ever heard or seen the show, what's the show set in Mayberry? Carol, shout it out for me. Andy Griffith's Show. Sorry, I grew up in Michigan. It's not really part of my boyhood culture. Andy Griffith's Show was set in this county. Anyway, they are, like many rural counties, they are struggling to retain and attract young adults, whether professionals and or young adults with kids. And so the project is how to market and retain and attract young adults to live in this rural county. So those are just 5 examples of applying social issues and local engagement at the local level. And so you got a sense of what kind of organizations these are. Nonprofits, entrepreneurs, small businesses, social entrepreneurship too. Big businesses sometimes as well, schools and government agencies. So it's quite broad in scope. And therefore, there is a set of skills and resources that are required. And I won't read all this to you, of course, as Valerie did not do either, which you probably appreciate. But a couple points. So the first 2 bullet points under skills. So these aren't necessarily research skills, frankly. They're more like frameworks for teaching and for how to present research. So making decisions with data. Oops, sorry, how did I do that? Oop. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about the first bullet point. Really talking about bullet points 2 and 3. Making decisions with data and design thinking. Do you all know what design, are you aware of design thinking? So you you first analyze the situation and very intentionally, I know it's impossible, but we try to not think about what the solution is. Solution comes later. You first analyze what's going on, primary, secondary research, and then you get into the idea formation, the solution formation part 2. And sometimes I find it difficult to do that because I want to jump right in. And entrepreneurship, you have an idea and then you try to justify why it works, right? I do a lot of work in that area. This is the opposite. You start very calmly with thinking about what's going on, and then only after that think about decision thinking. More specifically on research, data literacy is important. You can see a list there, different type of data variables, data packages, or collections of data sets, really. And also local research. And even though I'm representing, as one of my colleagues, more so secondary research, and our emphasis is on that on the resources side, but we do often provide some feedback on when primary research is needed, including interviewing local people, encouraging students to do that, and context there, particularly for the social aspect of it. You're doing with, right? You're not doing them for. You're not providing a nice service for them, and you have all the answers, and you're privileged, and you're going to help them out. But it's more learning with them, from them, and then doing with them. So that's a mindset of interviewing that we try to emphasize too. And then find local partners, of course, as I alluded to a little bit too. Research, you can see there are data at every level, local, state, national level. I mean, on a national level, like census data is, of course, local data in terms of its geography. So but it's a national organization collecting the data. But also, we have many wonderful databases that we can pay for. You can see a list there that provide both maps and tables and other kinds of outputs of both proprietary and public data, like demographic data, but public data, proprietary, be like psychographic data, some other kind of health indicators sometimes too, if it's like hospital-based too. And a lot of opportunity for us all to teach and consult with students, research consulting, regarding using data, right? There's a lot of growth opportunity and learning opportunity there too. But also textual-based reports, like from IBIS and Mintel and other examples. There's political science examples too. Generally, business intelligence publishers, but not just business, of course. And then finally, lists, local partners, right? It could be a nonprofit you're trying to identify. It could be if you're a business-to-business social entrepreneurship thing, you're trying to identify your both competitors and also your B2B customers, and nonprofits there as well, using tools like Candid GuideStar, which is free. So interesting mix, and think about how much time it takes us sometimes to teach students how to use these sources and also make decisions with them. It's not just like, here's the interface. And the question is, so what? What do I do with this data? Here's a lovely map. I like it. But how do I apply this to our problem? So more embedded work often as we go through this. Or at least you have a workshop and then you meet with the teams one-on-one or one with the team as a consultation mode. So it does require more librarian time. All right, over to Robin to kick us into the even biggest scope that we have for this.
Yeah, so again, I'm Robin Vickery. I'm from the University of Arizona, acting as primarily the business librarian there as well. So for this third part, I'll be really focusing on the skills and resources that students need for developing those sustainable solutions after graduation. So what are they going to do when they are no longer at the university? And so kind of the best example that I had when thinking about this is, it is, again, still in kind of that business environment, but at the University of Arizona, all undergraduate students enrolled in a business program. So regardless of major, they might be marketing, accounting, management information systems, economics. They are all required to take essentially a capstone class. They call it a summative experience class in entrepreneurship their final senior year. And it's called Innovating, Creating the Future is the class. So a very grand title, but it really does, I think, focus on the skills and kind of that mindset that students should have when they are leaving the university. And so within that class, students are forming teams and they're really moving through that entrepreneurship innovation process. So kind of like Steve mentioned with that idea generation phase, moving through to assessing, kind of validating that idea and planning it out through financial plans, marketing plans, and then ultimately pitching that idea. But what I think sets this course apart and why it is that kind of cumulative summative experience for the students is that they are not focusing on simply just generating a business idea. They are asked to identify a problem and then begin to form that solution. So it really is drawing on kind of that design and systems thinking approaches. And specifically, they are asked to emphasize, within the course description at least, it mentions wicked problems, which if you aren't familiar with that term, I wasn't as of a few months ago, but it's really identifying problems that they are so maybe large in scope, they have roots everywhere, maybe you aren't sure where they're going, what they're affecting, what the consequences are. So really thinking about those kind of overall societal problems that become so large and they really just don't have that clear-cut solution, which is challenging to then take those and think of an entrepreneurial solution for these students. And so the instructors that I've worked with have really integrated that by emphasizing to students to essentially not focus on problems that they themselves experience, or at least kind of the typical college student experiences. And I think that that's the way of really fostering that sense of kind of selfless thinking beyond themselves, so that when they graduate and they are developing these ideas and working with people, as we all do, that they are always kind of having that social civic responsibility in mind. And so as far as my role with working with the students, I really emphasize utilizing the library resources for that brainstorming problem phase. So not a new concept, right? We use idea generation tools within databases when you think of like CQ Researcher or opposing viewpoints, things like that, that are really intended for that topic development, for kind of the essential research paper that they might be asked to write. So when they're asked to instead identify those problems, it's really utilizing a lot of the resources that we've already discussed. So thinking about census data mapping tools or market research reports that really focus on a specific demographic and really digging into kind of who they are, what they experience, what the challenges are, so that they can begin to synthesize information and see, oh, well, it seems like there's a trend that, you know, thinking about the mapping tools, maybe they select an issue important to them like internet access and being able to see visually where that problem exists, who is experiencing that problem, and then begin to slowly develop a solution to that. And once they have identified that problem and begin to move through that innovation process I mentioned with the financial planning resources, kind of those more traditional business resources that we think of for entrepreneurs and just kind of getting that idea off the ground, those certainly still come into play. I'm going to go ahead and switch to this slide just so that you can kind of see, since I might not speak to all of these. But the other, lost my train of thought here. Yeah, so then they begin to think about the marketing aspect. So they still need to identify a target customer or an ideal customer base through this, even when it's kind of a social impact venture, you could say. And so I, again, really encourage them to think about, yes, who their target audience is, and maybe that's who's experiencing these problems through that research. But really, and this applies to any entrepreneurship class, not necessarily this one that is focused on the social impact, but really thinking about who they're targeting, but also who they're not targeting, I think is a more important thing to consider. And really sort of picking apart their idea and seeing, you know, if we choose to market in this way to this ideal audience that we believe will be the person or the people to buy this product or buy this service and benefit from it. But who are we not marketing to, and who are we excluding by marketing in that way? And so it's really about emphasizing those kind of competencies and critical thinking skills with the lens of DEI, and fostering that kind of throughout their experience so that they are prepared to bring forth those ideas in the workplace and really kind of change that atmosphere. And yeah, so that was mostly that case. So to kind of speak a little bit more to these skills here, like I mentioned, kind of it's really focusing on that kind of cultural competency, soft skills, I believe, in addition to all the skills and resources that we've already covered. Definitely, as Becca said, is an information literacy skill set here, that synthesizing information and thinking critically about what they're using and what they're not using. And I think we'll now be prepared for questions.